Hello everyone, this is Randall with Carter Hill Honeybees. Today I wanted to share with you in the form of a slideshow an experience I had about 3 years ago. Unfortunately, I didn't have access to video at the time, but I think I can make this make sense. So as you see in the picture here, this was about the middle of March. A swarm, I come home one day from work and to see this swarm hanging in a water oak tree. And if you'll notice how thick the limbs and stuff are around it, it was very difficult to access. It was about 20 feet, maybe a little higher off the ground, and I wasn't able to successfully capture it. So I'll share the story I think this will be 3 or 4 slides, but I'll share the story of exactly what I'd done to capture it, even though I had given up and was going to just basically wish them good luck and let them be on their way. Here in this picture, you can see basically right before I had given up, after several attempts to get my scoop and score bucket up in there to the swarm, and that's probably the major Achilles heel to the scoop and score is a swarm that's settled on the trunk or on a big diameter, like bigger than 1 inch diameter, and if the limb is close to the trunk, as you see in the picture, it makes the odds of getting them pretty low. And I was able to get some of the bees on the bucket, as you can see there, but apparently not enough, or I didn't get the queen. Even after letting it sit there, they would always wind back up on the limb. And I probably done this for a couple of hours, and but you might say, well, cut the tree down, but I personally just cannot contemplate cutting down a tree to get a swarm of bees. So I just decided to let them go and just give up on it and let the bees settle. Well, after 3 days of trying, or let me back up, 3 days after I had stopped attempting to catch them, the swarm was still there, much to my surprise. So at this point in time, I decided I would take this opportunity to just conduct an experiment and see if I could coax them down into a swarm trap. I didn't have any traps out at the time, so I hastily put a couple out. And in addition, they was already checking out a nuke I had sitting outside from a dead out, and they were checking out one of the swarm traps that I had hung where I store them under the eave of my lean-to. And this next picture, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. Here in this picture, kind of from the side, you can see I have the letter A, and a couple of numbers, and I'll explain those. The letter A in the circle above it is where the swarm is located in the tree, even though you probably can't see it, but it's there. All right, the number 1 with the circle above it is a nuke box that the scout bees were checking out. If I remember correctly, there was probably 5 or 10 checking it out at the time I took this picture. And then circle number 2 is a swarm trap, and the bees were checking that out too, and I think about 4 or 5 scouts was checking it out. I typically have about 8 or 10, or maybe even more, swarm traps hanging under that eave to the right that's off the picture there, which I didn't want those in the picture at the time. I just wanted what the bees was checking out. Notice also, kind of in the middle of the picture there, you can see the pink blooms of the peach tree, which that's usually the first fruit tree that blooms here in the yard. And those blooms, the peaches typically get killed by later frost because it tends to bloom a little too early, in my opinion. In a way, I was kind of surprised that the swarm didn't move into one of those traps because they were already there. The nuke had drawn out comb in it, and the swarm trap had plenty of room, or perhaps it was a little too close for what they was comfortable with. I don't know what the reason was, but surprisingly, to me they had not moved in there already. Now those two locations were probably 25, 30 yards away from where the swarm was hanging, so that may have had something to do with it. All right, here's the third location. This is a swarm trap that I did prepare before I put it out there. About 2 foot off the ground, about 60 yards away from the tree where the swarm is. I put a small piece of brood comb and lemongrass oil in there, hung it there. That's kind of I don't know what kind of bushy tree that is, but it has kind of thick cover there, and it's kind of at the edge of my Vitex trees, kind of in an open area, so I just kind of want to see what would happen. And although a few scout bees checked it out, probably 3 or 4, they pretty much abandoned it just after one day, so it didn't get much consideration, although it did get a little bit. So I really didn't expect to catch one in this, but you never know until you try. So I put it there kind of an odd place. You can actually see the roadway in front of my house and behind it if you look at the top of the picture there behind the number 3. Okay, here's the last slide in the series here. This is where I did catch the swarm, so I'll go through and kind of review and explain here what happened. So A, in the kind of upper left of the picture, that's where the swarm is hanging. That's going to be about 80, 85 yards away from where the swarm trap is hanging there on the side of the tree. X is my community feeder, where I had been feeding the bees for probably about the previous month. I was feeding them. I didn't feed any with feeders on the hives. They was all fed right there to a community feeder. And the reason I decided to place a trap there was to see if perhaps some of the workers had encountered that, and perhaps, some of the scouts from the swarm might come over there hoping to find some resource or food to carry back, and then, accidentally find that swarm trap. And that may have been what happened. I'm not sure. Also, sites 1 and 2 back from the first slide are immediately off to the left of the picture there. That's the side of the building. And then site number 3 is immediately off to the right of the picture where the air conditioner is. So that kind of gives you an idea of the placement. It's basically in a cone shaped configuration from the tree to this point. I didn't put any on the back side or to the side, so they basically one direction to go. I felt like the odds would be better because they had gotten most of their resources, all the colonies I had there, at that community feeder up to this point. So I was kind of thinking possibly that those scout bees might find a trap quicker that way. I also noticed how I've got the trap kind of angled in towards the building, and this is one of the things I've learned about placing traps over the years. Is it don't seem to matter how high it is. Notice I've only got it maybe 3.5 feet off the ground there, but I have the entrance kind of turned in towards the side of my honey extracting building, which is what you see the side of here. And that kind of provides a little bit of almost like cover. And it seems like when I do that with these traps, kind of conceal the trap a little bit, but give them a little bit of an open path. And I know this is pretty open, but it's kind of tucked into the side of that building. But the bees, for whatever reason, they tend to select a site like that over one that's just out in the open. I've seen this pretty consistently over the years. So in this instance, it paid off. Well, to get back to when I first placed it, it's doctored up like the one at site 3. I put a piece of comb and lemongrass oil in there. So the next day when I got home, they was checking it out, and there was already probably 25 to 50 bees in there jumping around. And if you've ever encountered scout bees checking out one of these swarm traps, some people call them paper mache or flower pots or whatever, but the bees are jumping around in there, and it literally sounds like microwave popcorn popping in the bag. It's a pretty amazing thing to hear. So when I I saw that the next day. I felt pretty confident that I had a real good chance of capturing that swarm in that trap. And this picture here was made at the time when the bees were in there. But the next day when I come home from work, the first thing I did, I didn't even pull up all the way in the driveway. I went out there to see, and the bees had already moved in there. They was gone from the limb, obviously, but they was done working. And so I went and grabbed the hive and installed them. They'd done built a piece of comb in there. So they must have got in there pretty early that morning, just as soon as it got warm enough for them to fly. I don't know if this would be a way to consistently catch bees like that over and over, but I guess some thoughts maybe that might benefit this, like if you use a community feeder, it might be a way to attract swarms from outside sources. Like, I'm sure like all of us, we lose swarms from time to time, and they go out and occupy trees and whatnot in the area. Well, you may be feeding those bees at a community feeder in the late winter, so you might lure a swarm or two back in, and I'm pretty sure that's happened to me over the years. I know of at least a couple or three times that I've observed swarms coming to either one of my hives or one of my traps here in my own yard that come from elsewhere. And I know over my 15 years I've lost several swarms that has flew off and come back. So that's something that might work. I haven't tried this anymore since then. I haven't had that kind of opportunity arise again, but I do think placement of a community feeder near a tree line or some, if possible, or somewhere that you would consider hanging a swarm trap might be beneficial to luring a swarm, especially from another area if you've lost them in years past or whatever. So it would work out for you. But that's basically the story of that experiment. I thought it was pretty interesting at the time. I was really surprised that this worked, that swarm hung up there for 4 days and then went into this trap a day after I put 2 of them out like that. Well, I want to say I appreciate you for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you found it as interesting as I did. I just wished I could have had all this on video when it happened. So if it ever happens again, I'll be sure to try to video that. But I appreciate you taking the time to watch and listen to this story. And we'll see you next time.